Good evening, friends. Welcome to this evening's session at KLF. We have with us Radha Chakravarty, writer, critic, and translator, in conversation with the author and former civil servant Anita Agnihotri. And they will be discussing Ma'am Anita Agnihotri's fascinating book, Mahanadi, The Tale of a River, as well as, I think, her other works and various other literary questions that will come up. So, before we plunge into what I'm sure will be a very exciting discussion, let me briefly introduce our two eminent panelists for the evening. Radha Chakravarty is a writer, critic, and translator. She is currently Professor of Comparative Literature and Translation Studies at Ambedkar University, Delhi. She has co edited The Essential Tagore and edited Shades of Difference Selected Writings of Rabindranath Tagore. She is the author of Feminism and Contemporary Women Writers and Novelist Tagore, Gender and Modernity in Selected Texts. Her translations of Tagore include Gora, Chokher Bali, Boyhood Days, Farewell Song, Sheshir Kobita, and The Land of Cards, Stories, Poems, and Plays for Children. Other works in translation are Bankim Chandra Chatterjee's Kapal Kundala, In the Name of the Mother by Mahashweta Devi, Vermilion Clouds, Stories by Bengali Women, and Crossings, Stories from Bangladesh and India. She has edited Body Maps, Stories by South Asian Women, and Writing Freedom, South Asian Voices. Her poems have appeared in many journals. Her forthcoming books include R. Shanti Niketan, a translation of Mahashweta Devi's memoirs, The Tagore Phenomenon, Qazi Nasrul Islam Selected Essays, and Mahashweta Devi, Writer, Activist, Visionary. Ma'am, we're delighted to have you with us this evening, and we look forward to a very insightful discussion. And coming to our eminent author, Ma'am Anita Agnihotri was born in Kolkata and started writing as a child. A graduate in economics from Presidency College and masters in economics from University of Calcutta, and later from the School of Development Economics, University of East Anglia, UK, Anita joined the Indian Administrative Service in 1980 and retired as a secretary to the Government of India. Her literary oeuvre spans across all genres: poetry, novels, short stories, writing for children, and critiques of development. She has authored over 40 books and has received several awards, including the Economist Crossword Award. Her writing has been translated into several Indian languages, as well as English, German, and Swedish. Mahanadi, A Day in the Life of Mangal Taram, Forest Interludes, Mahuldiha Days, Awakening, 17, and Sabotage are some of her works in translation. She has also authored many books in Bengali, including Mahanadi, which is the topic of today's discussion. Anita's writing explores the vast and complex Indian reality, many facets of human relations, and brings out the unheard voices of the marginalized and the underprivileged. Ma'am, we're very honored to have you with us today, and I'm sure our viewers are eagerly looking forward to hearing about your literary journey and this fascinating book. Mahanadi, The Tale of a River. Before I hand over to our panelists, I'd like to request the audience to type in their questions in the comments while the session is going on. So there will be a Q&A session at the end. So over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. I want to begin by thanking the organizers of the Kalinga Literary Festival and Nyogi Books for giving me the privilege and the opportunity and the pleasure to speak about this very important novel written by a dear friend and a wonderful writer, Anita Agnihotri, translated by another dear friend and wonderful translator, Nivedita Sen. I hope Nivedita is here with us, connected with us in this session. So it's really wonderful to be here in discussion with Anita about her novel. And before entering into dialogue with her, I must share with all of you my experience of reading this novel. a novel which Anita gave me in Bengali when it first came out. And I remember that we met with the Bangladeshi filmmaker Tanveer Mokammal on that
Yes.
occasion. And he too is someone who works with rivers and people around rivers. So it was a wonderful meeting, I remember. And subsequently, I felt overjoyed to know that another friend had translated this book. Reading the book has been a very special encounter for me because it's a novel with a difference. It's a novel, but not what we expect a novel to be, I think, from our everyday experience of reading. Because in this book, the main actors are not the individual figures. So many individual figures and individualized figures are there on the broad canvas of this novel. But I think what emerges is a sense of the people, all these people taken together, and you feel their living presence as a variegated, heterogeneous cast of characters and interacting with them, the socio historical matrix to which they belong, and as a live presence, the natural world with which coexists and interacts with the human and the social in a dynamic relationship. And the most notable protagonist, of course, is the river, Mahanadi, which signifies in its ever present yet ever flowing, ever changing aspects, the principle at the heart of this extraordinary experiment with the novel form. In the epilogue, Anita gives us a long list of names of individual characters who figure in the novel, and she says, perhaps she says, they will never meet one another, but the narratives of their lives are intertwined through the bond of the perpetually mobile river. The immense waters of the Mahanadi will reach the sea, chronicling the unbroken continuity in the grand narrative that recounts the life story of the human race. An ambitious claim, and the novel's distinctive, unorthodox character impels us to re examine our very notions of the novel form. Because what we encounter here is a fascinating blend of fact and fiction that also has in it elements of myth, legend, folklore, geology, politics, economics, and social history. So all kinds of narratives coalesce in what ultimately is a novel, but as I said, a novel with a difference. What strikes me is the rootedness of this novel, its very deep connections with local lives and histories. What strikes me also is the writer's intimacy with the subject matter. When I was discussing the novel with Anita, I was telling her that, this novel gives us so much knowledge and information about local lives, customs, and practices and histories, but not from the perspective of an anthropologist. It is a writerly imagination and an emotional, profound emotional engagement and an imaginative engagement with places, people, landscape, history, and the river itself, which takes the novel to another dimension altogether. And it brings to the fore a relatively neglected aspect of our living cultural history. In this novel, we find memory as a wellspring of creativity because so much of the novel is about remembering, about memory. And I think for Anita also, it is a process of remembering that is at the heart of the conception of the novel, I feel, when I read it. And another thing that's fascinating is not just the form of the novel, but the interplay of languages in it. We'll say more about that in the discussion because the English translation incorporates into it so many other languages, so many Odia and Bengali elements, along with localized dialects that draw out the heterogeneity of the subcultures represented here. It's a marvelous translation that deserves to be discussed in more detail, and we'll do that in the course of our dialogue. But to talk to Anita first about the novel. Uh, I think the first thing that strikes anyone is this question: is this a novel? How is it a novel? And it can be misread easily as an anthology of stories, but it's a novel, right? So, would you like to say something about how you reimagined the novel form here?
Thank you, Radha, for being here today and expressing whatever I wanted to say about the book so beautifully, so thoughtfully. Yes, it is a very different way of writing a novel, I would say. Mahanadi is a novel, it is a long novel, but it is not written in the usual style because as it is written, I thought of the journey as the river emerges from the hills of Chhattisgarh, Sihawa, and it travels inside, through Odisha, through the, highlands, then jungles, then it comes to the plain before it joins Bay of Bengal. As you travel with the river, the people, it is not a river which you see in a village or across a town. So the people keep changing. The context, the lives keep changing, and almost it is almost like a moving circle, as if a circle is rolling on the ground and you are moving with it. So I had some doubt initially that how people take it because some characters you meet in one chapter may not be there in the next chapters, though there is a overall continuity of life and the theme. But I found that in Bengali when it was out, nobody even questioned it. It was generous as readers are all over the all over the language spectrum. They took it very very well. So English also used the same thing. Yes, if somebody wants to read probably one story, maybe one chapter, and stop at it, there is no problem. You can also do it, but then you miss out on the integration of the idea. It's a river which is carrying along with it so many memories, local history, unwritten history, people's rituals, then lives. And Mahanadi is a magnificent river. On its banks, people have come and settled through centuries. People have come, and in Odisha, where I have spent a lot of my time, around 20 years of my life, I have seen this process how weavers come and settle near the river, how artisans come and stay. The water of the river is considered uh, very good for all kinds of work, apart from being pure. And it has changed the lives of people in different ways. For example, in Hirakud Reservoir, where it has brought water to its channels for Sambalpur, agriculture, it has also submerged hundreds of villages and thousands of families have been uprooted from the side of Mahanadi. So I thought that all this can be uh, accommodated, or I can do justice to this changing scenario, a kind of dynamism, only if I maintain this format of a narrative, which is a novel, yet not the way typically a novel is written.
So you felt that you had to break the form and remake it because the subject was so unorthodox and so different that it
Yes.
demanded a
Mm.
different kind of form, and that itself became, I think, a creative challenge for you, which the novel accomplishes with a great flourish, I feel. But I wonder, I mean, was this, how did the idea for this novel come to you? How did you conceive of this book? Was it something that suddenly came to you? You know, that sometimes it happens that, things suddenly click into place and you feel that, yes, I have the idea ready in my mind and you just write it. Or was it something that, was slow in the making and that evolved over time? Would you like to talk about the creative process and the process of how you imagined and thought this book into being and how it came about?
Yes, Radha. Actually, this entire creative process also is a part of memory. the river is overwhelming. The moment I thought about writing a novel about Mahanadi, it has taken me 10 years, to kind of have the
Yes.
courage. I always felt that if I start and I can't finish, it is left halfway through, what is going to happen? As a child, I remember when from Calcutta we go to Puri by train, and then early morning, there's a huge long bridge of Mahanadi on which the train goes, and in half sleep I would ask my mother that, what is this? She would say Mahanadi. I mean, the name is ringing in my mind since then. I must have been a child of 4 or 5. But then when I came to work in Odisha, I met Brahmani first, in a sense, because I was in Sundargarh working there. But then I met Mahanadi later, and I have been coming back to the river again and again. It took me about 5 years to write this novel. I started it, then I did not leave it. It was going on with my other writing. But I would come back to the villages once again. I would again go and meet the same people and same, weavers, the artisans, the, the factory of Orissa Textile Mills, which is now kind of defunct, lying there. So the city of Cuttack, which is a beautiful confluence of Kathajodi and Mahanadi. So all this is, all gradually it was kind of growing within me, and I must say that it was a experience of trepidation, fear, and great emotional, uh, you know, surge within me. Ultimately, I am relieved that I could complete writing the novel, and it has been written in my introduction in the Bengali book, which came out in 2015. That I'm at peace that I could actually write the novel, and I told many people during the process that what will happen if it is not what I wanted to write, and if it is incomplete or if it is inadequate. So my friends, the writers and scholars in Odisha, they always encourage me. They said, "No, you write down. If
Yes.
at least something will be, there. Something will be there,
Yes.
and if anybody wants to carry on from there, they are free." So that gave me a lot of courage and inspiration.
This is a fascinating account of the depth and level of your commitment to this project, and also how much it probably drove and impelled you from inside to give so many years of your life to it. And indeed, I think anyone who reads the novel will feel that it is a gift, that it is a gift to the readers of a world that is there but that we don't know about, that is somehow hidden from our consciousness because it is not there in the mainstream, in the domain of the mainstream. And it's in that sense you have really contributed something to the collective readerly awareness of all that our history and our culture has to offer. And you have done this not through social documentation, but rather through incorporating that kind of, memory making and fact finding combined into something that has emerged as a new and innovative creative form. So it's truly amazing to think of the process, and also to think that you were always in dialogue. I mean, the writing of it seems to have been also, like, I think, partly a dialogue with yourself, maybe your memory and, and the present, and at the same time, a series of conversations. From what you're saying, your interactions with the people, going back to the same people, talking to the scholars and members of the Oriya literary world, and through a series of conversations also, it seems to me from hearing you, this book emerged in the shape that it has taken. I don't know if I'm
Yes,
right, but that's what I'm hearing.
one thing I was mentioned here, that the bondage, the very close bondage I have with bonding I have with Odisha is a very
Right.
important factor. I have
Yes.
received so much of love and affection. Odisha has really been my second home in my life, and the
Right.
kind of warmth, kind of affection I have received from people, they
Yes.
have shared their joys and sorrows with me. I was
Yes.
working for people who needed rehabilitation way back in 1994. But then when I was writing Mahanadi and went back to the people who were then displaced, whom I never met before, all those memories, all the lost songs
Yes.
and all the lost rituals which they kind of felt were taken away from them because of this displacement, all kept on coming back to me. I would say the warmth of people's affection and their, holding me so close to their heart. I could go back to anyone and sit, as a part of the household, have food with them, spend night on a boat, on Mahanadi. All these has contributed to the making of the novel. That is why when you say there is a tune of intimacy, it is essentially because of this factor, which doesn't, I'm very fortunate to have got this. All the time when an author writes a book, these things don't come up or these things don't happen this way. Sorry, I interrupted you to say this.
No, no, that's, I think this is what we want. We want to hear from you about, and I'm just trying to draw you out to talk more about what went into the making of this book, because there's clearly, there are so many layers to it. And listening to you makes me understand a little better uh, where that kind of dense texture is coming from. It's coming from the dense textures of your own experience and your own involvements with the people there. So, people and the places as well. And not just the people, but isn't it true that the whole background is a very dynamic one? The whole context, the whole scenario within which the human drama plays out. I have said in the beginning, and I'll reiterate it here, that it's a very interactive kind of world where the human world is not seen in isolation from what is around it, but there's a kind of bringing together and braiding of these different strands: the social, the cultural, the natural world, the political world, the economic world. Do you want to say something about that?
I would only say that, all this came very naturally to me. I did not go anywhere with a, notebook in hand, jotting down what people are saying,
Yes.
because I have a lot of familiarity with the terrain on which this novel is based. I'm very familiar. It's almost like, if a Bengali is very familiar with the bylane of Calcutta, or somebody who is a resident of Cuttack is very familiar with his, you know, uh, you know, uh, field near his house. My familiarity, which comes very naturally, maybe because I have studied economics, I have been familiar with social sciences, a lot of things which I pick up and process. So all this merge together. Sometimes I may need, help of something, a book probably, to put a date. For example, if I see a temple, I don't want to leave it kind of loose or vague, like if the temple belonged to a particular era or time, I would like to put a mention. But then that's about all. But the integration of, say, my thinking, where everything merges, it is basically from my understanding of people's life and livelihoods, which has been there with me, as a process since, I would say, very early days of my writing. In Mahanadi only it takes a large canvas and it may not be familiar to everybody, but then it is a very instinctive, very natural weaving that happens within my mind. And I only hope that this process is kind of visible when you read the book. It is not a conscious, concerted attempt to show off that this is a fact, this is what I know. It is not that. I have put only this much as is required to make the voices, legible and the perspective clear. Only that much.
And I think what weaves all this together is, in a very important way, is the language in the book. The way it is a book that is ostensibly written in one language, Bangla, but so many other languages are woven into it. And the English translation, I think we need to talk about the English translation, which has, captured something so difficult to do, which is to capture the different languages within the matrix of the English translation, to give us the sense of all these different strands within the original. So I think if we think about the text now as a translated text, because we are looking at the English version of the book. The translation by Nivedita Sen is, I think, remarkable, especially because, as I was saying earlier, this text is very rooted in the local, and it draws on local idiom, local nuances, dialects, cultural terms, names of plants and flowers and food items and clothing and customs and practices and festivals. And the nuances are so very specific and particularized. And for a translator who has been brought up in a totally urban scenario like Nivedita, it is, I think, a remarkable achievement to engage with this language material, this linguistic matrix, and to make of it such a vibrant, living tissue of words that is her translation.
Yes,
I think
yes.
that's truly commendable and admirable achievement. I also feel that Nivedita's translation, it's bringing this text to non-Bengali readers, and when this text is moving beyond its immediate readership to a wider circle, it kind of broadens the ambit, the scope of the book's outreach, but it also creates its own special challenges. And I think Nivedita has been able to make a tremendous imaginative and linguistic leap into the unfamiliar terrain that you are, linguistic terrains that you're talking about, to achieve this. And what's even more of a gift, an added gift to your book, is the translator's note
Yes.
that she has
Mm.
so thoughtfully provided, because it foregrounds the struggles and challenges of translation, but also, and this I think is very important, she has talked about the considered choices and decisions she had to make as a translator when faced with a very difficult subject matter, because this not only shows her sensitivity to the process of translation and her deep engagement with it, but it also draws attention to the fact that the translation process is not a mechanical process where a bilingual person simply takes a text and shifts it to a different language. There is nothing mechanical in such a process. It is actually a process of deep engagement, and it is a creative process in its own way, and it's a process that involves choices. So sometimes we talk about the translator not having freedom. We talk about the translator as being merely an echo of the original writer's voice. But I feel when I read a translation such as this, I feel even more strongly, although I feel this about translation in general, that the translator, in making choices, is exercising her own creativity and her agency, her ability to actually act on the existing source text, to bring it closer to another audience, but to bring it to that audience in her own use of language. And that such use of language is never something which can work according to a given formula. It can never really work mechanically. If it is to work, if it is to bring the earlier text alive in a new way to a new audience, then it has to have in it the translator's own creative energy infused in it. So, this is what I feel Nivedita's translation brings to the fore as an issue about translation that often gets overlooked. That the translator is not just a passive medium through which a text passes from one language into another, but the translation is an active, the translator is an active mediator who gives the text a new life in a new and altered form, because the translation is never identical with the original. No one who reads Mahanadi in Bangla will feel that it is identical to its English translation. It is not. The English translation is tied to the source text, but also a text in its own right for those who cannot access the Bangla text. And I think it's very important to recognize that. And such changes and alterations are not failures. We keep talking about translations being faithful or not being accurate, but actually, such alterations are inevitable, and they are markers of how texts travel through translation and survive through this process, which inevitably involves changes and mutations. So I felt that, I think it's important to draw attention to this because we are reading here a translated text, and the role of the translator in choosing to translate the book is also important because I think the translator
Yes.
also is recognizing the significance of the book, which is why she's involving herself in this, undertaking this task of bringing it to a new readership. I don't know if you would like to say something about the languages in the book as well, Anita.
Yes, Radha. I think what you have said is so important for people who read translations because very often this process is not spelt out. And Nivedita being a very, very, I would say she's a very quiet and very dedicated person who delved into, as you said, she went into an unknown territory in the sense that she's a city dweller and this book may be different from what else she has translated. But she would never show. I mean, she would always make you feel that she is obliterating herself. No, that is not correct. Without showing it, she has created a different language. That is where this translators agency you mentioned it comes from. Because I would say that the way she got engrossed with the book, tried to understand each and every nuance of use of a word which may not be Bengali. It is not only see urban Odia, it is a local Odia language, some local usages. And in fact, our own, friendship, while she was translating and we were sharing the drafts, we became so close to each other that we started calling ourselves Mahul Shoki. You have seen the chapter there. We were kind of Mahul Shokis because we became friends through this process. And I had seen her journey because she gave about one full year of her, I mean, apart from that, alongside her work, extremely busy life and other responsibilities. And I would say the dedication and the authenticity she has brought into the translated version is has an immense impact on your psyche. I mean, there is a, I don't know how to define it, but there's an Indianness in the kind of writing that it is. I mean, it is very Indian. It is very much our own. So that process uh, doesn't automatically come, as you said. If you just think that, well, it is Bengali, I'm transferring this into English language. So she had to get into the intricacy of expressions. She had to ask questions. I remember she was carrying the book always with her, even when she went abroad, the book was with her. And I'm most grateful to her that she chose this book. It is not an easy task. Sometimes it can be a huge burden on the mind of a translator, but ultimately what has come out in translation is wonderful. I mean, I'm very grateful to Nivedita for bringing this very, very authentic work, Mahanadi in translation, with all the flavor, color, all the emotions, and yet being very, very subtle about it. So it's an immense gift, I would say, to me and the readers. And I would say, I always jokingly say, a translator's note, it can be published as an independent paper, you see. It is such a beautiful piece where she has explained, given out her secrets as to how she has translated what and how she took her decisions. So I always tell her that you should make it a longer paper and maybe publish as an independent piece because students who study translations, even for teachers, it can be a very important thing to read. So this is about it and how the translation becomes a bondage between the writer and the translator,
Yes.
who is not only a translator within quotes but much more than that. Is also a very interesting, journey, and it happened in our case.
It's wonderful. The bonding through translation. Very interesting because I've often thought of translation as a kind of dialogue between the writer and the translator, but here it really happened, literally and not just metaphorically. So that's wonderful to know. Yes, I was just wondering how much time we have. Would you like to read something from your book, Anita?
Yes, I was
Uh,
thinking
so
of
that
reading a bit from the Bengali Mahanadi just to give the readers,
yes.
audience, a little idea of how the sound of the language is. And maybe then you can also read a bit of from the
Okay.
translated Mahanadi. I will read maybe two passages from a chapter where I have described the village of the brass makers So I'll start from there. কাঁসারিদের শালগুলিতে ভোর ভোর কাজ শুরু হয়ে যায় সূর্য ওঠার আগেই। গ্রামের নাম কন্টিলো, ইয়েস দিস দ্য বেঙ্গলি ওয়ার্ড। নদীর ধারে পাহাড়ের জঙ্গলে কন্টেই বলে এক ধরনের কাঁটা ঝোপ খুব গজায়। গ্রাম বুড়োরা বলে সেই জন্যই কন্টিলো নাম। এক একটি শালে ৩ কি ৪ জন করে কাঁসারি বসে, টিন বা খড়ের ছাদ, চারপাশ খোলা রাঙা পাথরের উপর সিমেন্ট বাঁধানো মেঝে। ওরই মধ্যে কোথাও গনগনে আগুনের ভাঁটি, কোথাও ধাতুকে ঠান্ডা করার জলের কুণ্ড। আগুনের কাছে হাপড়, ৩ গুণের বেশি তামার সঙ্গে টিন মিশিয়ে তৈরি হয় কাঁসা। তা কাজের জন্য খাঁটি কাঁসা প্রমাণ মতো পাওয়া যায় না। পুরনো ভাঙা কাঁসার বাসনও গলিয়ে নিতে হয়। তামা আর টিন দুটো ধাতুই নরম সরম, কিন্তু এদের মিশিয়ে শঙ্কর ধাতু কাঁসা যখন তৈরি হয় সে অনেক বেশি কঠিন, আর তার নমনীয়তাও কম। তাই কাঁসা সহজে বাগ মানে না কারিগরের হাতে। তাকে হাতুড়ি দিয়ে পিটিয়ে পিটিয়ে লোহার ছাঁচে ভরে আগুনে ফেলে দেওয়া হয়। সে আগুনে বাতাস দিতে হাঁ করে হাঁফায় হাঁপড়। কেবল গলালেই হবে না, তাকে আবার হতে হবে জমানো কঠিন। লোহার ছাঁচ থেকে বার করে তাই সপাট গোল কাঠের পাত্রে সর্ষের তেল মাখিয়ে ঢেলে দেওয়া। জমা কঠিন ধাতু আরো একবার আগুনে পড়ে, আবার তাকে হাতুড়ি দিয়ে পিটিয়ে পিটিয়ে সুন্দর আকার দেওয়ার চেষ্টা হয়। ছেনি আর উপ্পো ধেয়ে আসে, তারা কেটে সমান করে ফেলে এবড়ো খেবড়ো ধার। এবার লম্বা লোহার খন্তা দিয়ে বারবার আঘাত করে খুশিয়ে ফেলা হয় ধাতুর উপরিতলের পোড়া আস্তরণ। তবে আসে পাত্রের ঔজ্জ্বল্য আর ঝকঝকে রং। মানুষের হাতে ধরা যন্ত্র, আগুনের ভাটি, শীতল জল সবাই মিলে কাঁসাকে আঘাত করে, গরম করে, তাপ নেভায় তার শরীরে। এই অমানসিক লড়াইয়ের পালা শুরু হয়ে যায় ভোর থেকেই, যাতে আগুনের তাপে আরো বেশি জ্বলন না ধরে কারিগরের খোলা বুকে। হাতের উপর খন্তা এসে পড়তে পারে, কাঁসার বদলে আঙুলের মাথার মাস কেটে নিতে পারে উপ্পো বা ছেনি। ঠক ঠক ঠন ঠন ধাতব শব্দের গানে তরতাজা হয়ে ওঠে কাঁসারিদের পাড়া। কোনাকার পাড়ায় যেমন বহু তাঁতের খটখট শব্দের বৃন্দগান, তেমন কংসারি পাড়ায় ধাতুর বুক থেকে উঠে আসে সনন। মায়ের পেটে থাকতে থাকতেই শিশুর কান অভ্যস্ত হয়ে যায় এতে। This chapter is called Nilo Madhav, is a village Kontilo. This is where Mahanadi is passing through this village. And Nilo Madhav was the original deity of this village, which was established on Brahmadri hills. So this is a very special place, the village of the brass makers, and I thought I wanted to read this because it is a lot of sounds and descriptions in this part. I think we have a little time, Radha. You can also read a bit from the translated text. I think there is a little connectivity problem at Radha's end. Radha, can you hear me?
Yes. I seem to have gone offline for a bit.
Yes.
Can you repeat what you just said?
No, I just said nothing. I just said that probably you were finished, and I said that I can't see you. I couldn't see you for a little while. Radha, can you hear me?
Yes, I think something happened to
Your connectivity, you went offline. Would you like to go out and join again?
Yeah. Okay, I'm glad I'm back. Yes.
Yeah.
If this happens again, Anita, I request you to read a little bit of something else till I rejoin so that the session can continue. Sorry about this, but it's not in our hands. These technical glitches keep happening.
Not at all.
Yes. So maybe I will read something in English. I'm sorry I missed
Yes,
the
yes.
last bit of what you were saying, Anita.
No, no, nothing
Uh,
much. You can read the English
uh,
part.
Maybe I can read something in. Yes. I had a lot of trouble trying to choose what to read from this book because there are so many passages that were so very evocative and moved me so much. Then ultimately, I have selected a small passage from the chapter called Mohul Shoki. Anita has already mentioned it. And here we have the narrative of two girls who grew up together and they were friends. Himrani was a Adivasi girl called Malati who had become Mohul Shokis because they had picked lapfuls of Mohul flowers from the old Mohul tree at the end of the village and had sworn to be friends with each other for many lifetimes. But how circumstances separate them and how this separation persists in memory and comes out in the stories that Himrani tells her young son Kuber when putting him to sleep. So, and how there is a kind of collective people's memory of the way in which
You can probably switch off the video, then it will be more, it will be better.
I think I'm back. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. But if you switch off the video and
Okay, I'm
talk,
really
I think the
sorry.
bandwidth will be better. But looks all right now.
Sorry?
It looks all right now. I can hear you.
All right. Okay. Okay. So I'll read this short passage where years after their separation, Himrani is putting her small son Kuber to sleep. Kuber would sleep on the palm mat. Next to him, Ma would be in a half lying position. She would be caressing his body and hair with her hands, and Kuber would say, Ma, please tell me once again the story of what happened when Hirakud was built. It was a narrative of people's heartbreak, the story of the distress people felt by having to find refuge in other villages. There were many such chronicles about Hirakud. Ma did not want to recall those harsh truths to her child. Listen to what happened after the floods came, she would say instead. All the houses were makeshift village homes here. People were going slowly with their window frames, fuel wood, cows, ducks, and hens in bullock carts and lorries. All other creatures, even dogs and cats, stay close to human beings, as do cows and goats. They understand the joys and the sorrows, the bad and the good, the scarcity and shortages of their households. But the birds in the sky do not keep so much track of day to day life. Early every morning, they fly away towards the dense shal and shagun forests of Choto and Borodungi. There are so many other trees there: Orjun, tamarind, shirish, acacia. The birds carry fruit, food in their beaks and come back home. In the nests they have built in the hollows of trees and on branches are the eggs they have laid. And there are newborn chicks who have not found their voice yet. And if you open their beaks, you will see bright red gaping mouths. What happened one fine day was. Tell me, Kuber was saying this indeed, but his eyelids were closing with sleep. Ma was deliberately stretching the end of the story so that Kuber would fall asleep, listening. On certain days, what he was listening to at the time that he had not fallen into deep sleep remained in Kuber's mind. One day, the birds had flown off like every other day, leaving their chicks and eggs in their nests. The sun was just about rising. Crowds of people, carts, and bullocks were standing next to the newly constructed sluice gates of the dam. The birds had not noticed anything. Otherwise, they would have seen that the last people had evacuated, emptying the entire village, pakka buildings, huts, granaries, and local markets. The bulls in the last bullock cart, piled with luggage, were going towards an unknown habitat after crossing the frontier of the water. Towards twilight, when the birds were on their way home, Hirakud was a sea of unlimited water with gently swaying blue waves. The water had been released after morning. The water from the river had come through the sluice gate and filled the heart of the biggest dam in the country. The birds then became directionless. Their familiar villages and trees were all under water. Their distress calls sounded like wailing. They flailed their wings and were trying to look for those branches where they used to sit after a bout of flying. Their resting places had all gone deep underwater. So the birds flew in circles over the water. Who could say on which tree lay their unhatched eggs and the fledglings that had not yet learned to fly? Bo, have you seen those birds fly? Kuber used to call his mother Bo, according to the tradition of the region. Ma was the beau, the daughter-in-law of the father-in-law and the mother-in-law. Therefore, she was also the beau of the child, who might have just learned to speak. Yes, of course, haven't I? The beating of their wings, the long drawn-out calls like weeping. I can't ever forget, my child, their circling over the water, looking for their eggs and their fledglings. Hearing this, at some point, Kuber would fall asleep. The beating of the birds' wings and their cries would get drowned within his sleep. When the morning sunshine would spread all over the room, he would hear the bird calls lying in bed. These were different birds. These birds were calling in the joy of the sunrise. Among these, were there any of the eggs that had been swept away, or any of the fledglings that had got lost? Were these the new generations of those unfortunate birds who had located different trees, hollows, roofs, and Shiv temples all over again?
Thank you so much. You read it so well, so beautifully.
I just find it so moving the way through the despair and distress in the animal kingdom you have brought out the human trauma simultaneously of something that affected the life around that was not just the human life. So it's wonderful how you've done that. So yes, I I really found this passage very powerful. So maybe it's time now to open our session to some questions from the audience. And we would request Sumit perhaps to show us some of the questions in the comment box, if any. Or if anyone has a question now. If anyone has a question now. Anita seems to have left.
Yes,
Anita,
I
I
went
think
out for
we
the
lost you. Yes. But we are requesting Sumit and Priya to please share with us any comments or questions that we can respond to.
We don't have any probably. I went to see the comments, and in the process, I went out and came
Yes.
back
Okay.
again.
Yeah. I was also. I think
Maybe
Priya
Priya can join us.
has joined us.
Um, I think that was a very insightful discussion that both of you had. And I'm sure, even if there are no questions at this moment, our viewers who've been watching will think things through. And you never know, ma'am, they may come and contact you later. This often happens after these sessions. Someone may not be able to come up with a question right away, but they may very well come up with one later. So I'm sure you'll get feedback and positive thoughts after this session. Um, if there's anything further both of you would like to discuss or say to each other.
I think we had a very nice discussion and we have read from the text also. So
Yes.
there is nothing much I would like to add unless Radha would like to say the concluding words.
But I just wonder, I mean, if you want to think of Mahanadi in relation to your other work, you have written so much about Orissa, and do you want to think about Mahanadi in relation to your other work? Just as a closing comment on, and maybe something about where it's taking you in your future work.
Yeah, I just mentioned this. It is very interesting that when I wrote my first novel, Bahul Dihar Din, which is translated again as Bahul Dihar Days by Kalpana Vardhan, it is not exactly about the river, but Brahmani River, and again people on the side of the river, around the river, in an imaginary place called Mohul Diha. It plays a very important role, and as usual, I'm fascinated by this harmony between nature and people. But I have now written another book in Bengali, which is a kind of a sequel to Mahanadi, which is not connected even in themes, but it is another journey and it complements Mahanadi in a sense that this novel starts from the Niyamgiri hills of Kalahandi, and then it comes following the course of Indravati river down to Chhattisgarh, and then it goes to crosses Chhattisgarh and goes to Gadchiroli. Basically, this is a huge tract of land, also with Koraput and Raigada on the other side, where many people had come. For example, the Bengali displaced people from the then East Pakistan had come and settled here, and there was a huge forest. Why it is called Mahakantar? There was a huge forest which is loosely called Dandakaranya. Somewhere the forest is still there, somewhere it is vanished. But the entire track where Indravati flows and the forest is around, it has become a journey again of very, very different things. On the one hand, there is aggression for land from the side of the industry. On the other hand, the desire for the tribals to stick to their land and their own cohesive life. On the other hand, there is a disturbance, the kind of conflict when the police and paramilitary they have conflict with people. The innocent villagers become kind of what is called collateral damage. So the entire situation has been captured in present time through this novel. It is called Mahakantar, and it is partly in Odisha in the sense that I have also tried to speak about the Niyamgiri resistance of the tribals, the Dongoria Kanthas against the mining there. And it's a long novel again, but in a sense, Mahakantar, the story of the forest, which was there, which is a little bit there now, and Mahanadi, they are together. They constitute an image of India right now, and with all its everything, with all its again. Rituals, oral history, the songs, and also people's difficulties of people's life, their joys and sorrows. So I think these two can be read together, and maybe someday Mahakantar also will be translated into Bengali, into English, and maybe Mahanadi has been done into Odia. It is waiting to be published. So I'd be very happy if people of Chhattisgarh and Odisha who don't read Bengali can also read these two novels together. This much I would say for now.
Ma'am, I have a question for you.
Yes,
As
yes.
not directly related to your writing, but tangentially so. As a civil servant, you're an inspiration for many young women who may be watching this program. So I wanted to ask you, how have you balanced both careers, your professional career as a civil servant and your literary career as a writer? How did you manage to make time for your writing in the midst of what must have been a very, time pressed career?
I don't think I did anything special. Work, and family were my priorities. Writing came after that. Even then, I tried to make time for writing. It's a struggle, of course, because I was out of Bengal. I wrote in Bengali, so it was a constant struggle to be in touch with my mother tongue and write in it. Bengali is a very dynamic language. If you lose touch, then you are not able to write Bengali well. And it's all a turmoil. But often in turmoil and unplanned developments in life, things happen. But I would say that work and people came first in my priority. And I'm happy that I could continue to write. Now that I'm a whole time writer, I can see the value of the continuity that I could maintain. But then you have to work hard. I have put in, let us say, 10 to 12 hours of work every day for a period of 36, 37 years of my life in service, which is not a small thing for a mother and a mother of children, somebody who has a family and other responsibilities. So good. Now I can look back and feel a little happy that I did not give up writing on account of pressure of work. Maybe I sacrificed other things. I sacrificed a lot of socialization, but ultimately, my closeness, my attachment is for people and their lives. People unknown to me, seemingly, but then I'm very close to them. So this is what kept me going.
I guess many of those people may have appeared as characters in your work. You've given them life through your writing that way.
But you can't detect it because you always break and
No.
fuse and join together people in such a
Yeah,
way that you can't recognize any single person. That is
true.
the that
Yeah.
is the way in which characters are made and unmade, I would say.
Yes. And that is your creative gift too, no doubt. So let me, I think, bring this to an end by thanking both our panelists for the evening for giving our viewers such an insightful discussion into Mahanadi and the author's writings and literary career. We are very grateful that you made time to have this discussion today. And I'm sure we will have more such discussions going forward. And I look forward to interacting with you again on some future panel. Thank you
Thank
both
you so
so
much,
much.
Priya.
Thank
And
you.
thank you, KLF.
Very
Thank
much.
you, Neogi Books, for bringing out this beautiful book.
Our
Thank you.
pleasure, ma'am. Thank you.
Thanks, Radha, once again.